Welcome to the 430 movie. Back in the 70s and 80s, before the advent of VHS, chances are, if you saw a classic movie, it was on the 430 movie. With their famous theme weeks, it was a chance to see movies you never saw and get reacquainted with some old classics. Now, on the 430 movie, we take over the vertical and the horizontal and put together our dream theme weeks that you could watch at home and relive the glory days of the 430 movie. Hi, I'm Mark A. Altman, and welcome back.
Just dripping with professionalism.
To the 430 movie. Dripping. How appropriate.
I want to take over the diagonal, however. I don't want to just do the vertical and horizontal. I want to do the diagonal as well.
We're going to add some HDR this week.
Right.
Well, before we get too far and announce this week's theme, I want to introduce you to our panel of expert programmers. We have Ashley E. Miller, writer for such films as Thor and X-Men First Class, and TV series such as Fringe, Black Sails, and the upcoming Lore Season 2, which drops on Amazon this month.
I have the greatest enthusiasm for the mission, Mark.
We are also joined by Stephen Melching, writer for such series as Batman, The Brave and the Bold, X-Men the Animated Series, Star Wars Rebels, and the upcoming Star Wars Resistance. Welcome, Steve.
All right, chumps, let's do this. Leroy Jenkins.
Well, you could have done that on Video Game Week. Okay, and last and certainly not least is Daren Dochterman, a conceptual designer for film and TV series such as
Oh, my goodness.
Master Commander.
I was about to say Chronicles of Riddick, and he said, don't mention that.
Don't mention
Master,
it. Now you've done it. Now it's out there.
It's already out
People
there.
know.
The second season of Westworld. He was also the visual effects supervisor on Star Trek The Motion Picture Director's Edition and the designer of our fantastic logo t-shirts, now available at 430movie.com. No colon.
No colons, please,
after
people.
lunch, 430movie.com.
Well, hi, everybody. It's good to be here.
That was a
After
hell of an
all that.
introduction.
My goodness.
You've never listened to me before, Crom. So we have a very exciting theme week for you this week. It is, on the 430 movie, Sword and Sorcery Week. This week.
swords for 50, Alex.
On the 430 movie. And we are going to be talking about the legendary sword and sorcery fantasy movies that are beloved by many of us. And it's an exciting...
That a few of us really like.
Beloved by some, tolerated by others.
And I'm really
Perhaps
excited.
we'll learn the answer to the riddle of steel.
Perhaps.
Or
the charm of making.
Conan, what
Okay, who can do the charm of making?
I can.
Okay, let's hear it.
Anal nasrach uthvas bethut dochiel tiende.
Well, how appropriate. He summoned the dragon, which is a great way to start.
Welcome, Mr. Dragon. How are you?
Hello there.
Sword.
Hi, I'm the dragon.
Our first film, Monday,
Ladies and
Pete's Dragon.
Oh, my goodness.
Okay,
Yeah,
Monday on the 430 movie, Mr. Daren Dochterman.
I would like to nominate one of my favorite films from the early 80s, Dragon Slayer.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Nice.
It is
Just the last 10 minutes or the whole movie?
No, the whole movie, actually, because it is probably the most realistic depiction of a dragon ever seen in a movie, certainly before CG. And it
More
just
so than the Black Cauldron.
yes,
Okay.
it just feels so real and yet fantastical at the same time. The movie is just it is a deliberately paced film. For those of you listening at home, that means slower than most. But it has some amazing moments and some fun bits, and it sort of came out at the same time as Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it sort of got run over by all the other movies that came out at the time. But it still is an amazing representation of this genre that it takes itself completely seriously, yet it's also a lot of fun. But it's also really scary in points. I mean, when you have a realistic dragon, you also see the things that a realistic dragon does, and sometimes it's not pretty, and people will be hurt badly.
Yeah, it's interesting because on a previous episode we were talking about the state of Disney at the time, and it was the antithesis of what they are now, this media powerhouse. Back then they were, sort of scrounging around for anything to capitalize on a trend. Was Black Hole in '79, trying to be Star Wars. Later on, we talked about Tron, trying to tap into the video game phase. Dragon Slayer was definitely an attempt to sort of capitalize on epic fantasy, but also take advantage of the new tools.
And it wasn't Disney. This was Paramount.
Was it?
Yeah.
Why did I think it was? It wasn't It was a co-production with Disney, wasn't it?
I don't know. But
Well, I think of it as a film that was really trying to capitalize on the growing popularity of Dungeons and Dragons, which
That's true.
started kind of in the mid-'70s and started to get really popular around 1979, 1980. That's around the time I was introduced to it, and it was D&D was incredibly popular in the early 80s. And oddly is again. It's very popular now, arguably more popular now than it was.
Well, Ashley plays
then.
D&D with a bunch of very big, high-powered,
Nerds.
creative nerds.
Total goobers. In fact, I'm playing tomorrow all day.
This was made by friends of George Lucas, Matthew
Also a nerd.
Robbins and Hal Barwood, and they were sort of on the in the friend group of Lucas and Spielberg and all those folks at the time, and this was sort of their big break, and it just never happened for them. Yeah. But I think that the movie itself is an amazing.
Well, the dragon is
Dragon's
terrific.
awesome.
I mean, it was
ILM at its
Magic.
best.
Yeah,
Yep.
ILM did
Yeah.
the dragon. The
And
dragon
they
looks
developed a
terrific.
new method for doing this called go motion, which puts the blur in a stop motion animation, and it looks absolutely real.
I mean, it was really the next extension of the Harry Harryhausen
Yep.
model, and it just takes it to a new level. And that's why I joked at the beginning. I said, I joked that it was Touchstone. No, I joked that it was that the last 10 minutes, because really it hides the ball for a long time. You don't see much of the dragon, but all the stuff of what Verathrax or what was the
Vermithrax, pejorative.
That it was
Great name, but I love that name. For a
it was
dragon.
such a remarkable, and I would argue that perhaps it is the greatest dragon stuff up until Game of Thrones.
I would agree with that.
I think it really was pretty awesome. I don't love the movie, but I think the dragon stuff is amazing. And of course, Ian McDiarmid is in it in an early role.
Right.
And Ralph Richardson gives a great
Richardson is amazing
performance.
as the wizard.
Peter McNichol is in it in an early role. I mean, this is pre-Ghostbusters 2, which is anything is better than Ghostbusters 2. So
Had some great location work, as I recall.
Yeah. And it has a little bit of frontal nudity, which is always nice.
yeah, and it was a PG. This is back in the day. The
Nothing wrong
PG
with that.
movie had
Right.
tons of nudity, which
Right.
was always, which they realized is like you wouldn't hear profanity, and people smoked, and there was nudity, and it was still okay for the kids.
Yeah, I would make that trade.
The dragon is completely naked.
Yeah, that's true. He is not wearing pants. Vermithrax, no pants.
But yeah, I think Dragon Slayer is a great way to start the week. On Monday, Steve, Tuesday.
Well, I would nominate a film that was the second R-rated film that I ever saw in a movie theater.
Don't you go there.
1982's Conan the
God
Barbarian.
damn it!
Are you going to pick that one? I'll pick
You
something
know
else.
it. No, you go ahead.
Okay. No, Conan was a film that when it came out, I was really not expecting anything of it. I was 14 years old when it came out. Again, I was in the height of my Dungeons and Dragons playing, so I was really into that sort of sword and sorcery mode and really wanted to see anything, that had to do with that sort of material. And I had not read any of the Robert E. Howard books or the comics, although I kind of knew who Conan was. I didn't really know the mythology. Arnold Schwarzenegger was an unknown quantity at this point. He just looked like this muscly guy with a weird accent. And basically, the only thing I knew about it was I was listening.
I've never prayed to you before, Crom. But if you don't listen to me now,
I was listening to Howard Stern when he was on DC 101 in Washington, D.C. And he did, at the time, he used to do these little humorous audio sketches. And he did a series of episodes called Conan the Barbarian, the first Jewish barbarian. And he was just making fun of Conan. Mm-hmm. And so I went into this thing really with no expectations and was absolutely blown away by what I saw on the screen. I was not prepared for the sort of the epic scale of this film, the violence in it, which was hardcore.
Yeah.
There's nudity in it. There's cannibalism. It has this tremendous music score by
Basil Polidoris,
mm-hmm. which is just blasting out at you. It's really amazing. I think maybe the best fantasy score ever.
Yeah,
I like it even better than Lord of the Rings.
There are people I think who have never seen the movie who would recognize that score.
Yeah, it's very much similar to Orph.
Sure, the Carmina
Burana.
Yeah, you know what's great about Polydorus too is he did a completely different score for Conan the Destroyer, the dreadful PG sequel. But the score is great for Conan the Destroyer as well, and it's completely different than what he did for the first, which is very Wagnerian but it's
Conan
more lyrical. The second one,
Conan the Destroyer, was a bit of a guilty pleasure for me. It's a terrible movie, but
it certainly destroyed the franchise.
But I love the first movie. I mean, it was directed by John Milius, co-written by Oliver Stone. Although I don't think they used much of his script. And if you have the Blu-ray or DVD, do yourself a favor and listen to the audio commentary track with Arnold Schwarzenegger and John Milius.
We have Arnold right here, right now. Arnold, do you want to add
remember
anything
doing
about
that track?
I remember doing the track. It's so much fun because we watched the movie and it's so funny. Look, he kicked this guy in the crotch and it's hilarious. I love it. It's so much fun. And I remember those days when we were working on Conan. I remember seeing my enemies driven before me and hearing the lamentations of the women. It was great.
Let me tell you, that's really what the audio commentary is like. It's
exactly like that.
And John Milius, they're just watching this film as it plays and reminiscing about filming it and just kind of commenting on what you're watching, like describing what you're watching in a really funny way.
But it's mostly Schwarzenegger laughing at watching the movie. Yeah. That was funny. It's basically that. And if you want to, pretend that you're sitting next to Arnold watching his movie, then
that's what it's like.
You listen to that. And
it's funny. Look, John Milius is such an interesting gonzo filmmaker.
Another one of those people from the George Lucas crowd.
Yeah, from the USC days,
USC
who just, there's nobody like Milius anymore. There was a great documentary a couple years about him. I'm actually don't love any of his movies, but I love Milius. He was this crazy right-wing gun nut, everything I hate, and yet I love this guy. And obviously he wrote the great Quint speech with Robert Shaw.
For those of you who don't know, John Goodman's character in The Big Lebowski is based on John Milius.
Yeah.
And then you have, he did obviously a lot of the Apocalypse Now screenplay. And if you've ever seen him speak at a screening of Apocalypse Now, I mean, he is a raconteur of the first class. I mean, he can just hold you completely spellbound.
He was famous for bringing firearms to meetings,
which I wish we could still do.
Well, you can
if you've seen the Hearts of Darkness documentary, you kind of realize that the superhero of Apocalypse Now was actually Milius. There's the story about Coppola seeing fat Brando arrive and basically seeing his entire movie going down in flames. And I think what was the quote? It was,
I swallowed a bug.
It was I swallowed a bug. That basically in half an hour, Milius had kind of talked Coppola out of his depression and convinced him that not only would they win the Academy Award, they would win the Nobel Prize.
I mean, God, this guy. I mean, just amazing. And Conan is everything that's in his wheelhouse. I mean, it is dark and violent and nihilistic and Nietzsche-esque, and it's
And just like those concepts of masculinity, real man's man kind of stuff.
But James Earl Jones, right, kind of, I think, in some ways embodies what interested Milius in this film even more than Conan did as Thulsa Doom, although he really should have been Thothman. But that moment when he says, "Do you know what true power is?" And then he looks up and he beckons to one of his followers, standing up, this woman standing up on a ledge, and she simply falls to her death. Right, and it's the whole riddle of steel thing. It's what's stronger, steel or the flesh, that wields it. But it's the will to wield the steel, which is fascinating. And then you see this this movie that's this kind of perfect, in some ways, gem of an action film that has a lot on its mind. And it kind of becomes the 2011 Conan the Barbarian, where the riddle of steel became something about fire and ice. And I'm not even sure what the hell that was about.
Well, they don't belong in the same. And I love Marcus Nispel, but that movie does not belong in the same breath.
It's not even the same
Well, it's
conversation.
basically swords don't kill people. Thulsa Doom kills people.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, James Earl Jones is so great in that movie, and I love his final speech. I mean, as a 14-year-old, I never heard anything like that when Conan is confronting him.
I am your
He's
father.
helpless.
He says that literally in the movie.
He's going, if I'm not your father, then who is? He made him, and if he strikes him down, then his reason for being is done. That was like such an insane concept.
And not only that, how great is that transition? I mean, you look at like these clumsy transitions, like even Red October when they go from Russian to English, and it's like the push in from Judgment at Nuremberg and then the pull out. It's like that transition from him as a young boy to
on the Wheel of Pain,
on the Wheel of Pain to
Is
Arnold
brilliant.
is brilliant. It's such a great way to do that. And I mean,
with that great score playing.
I mean, that scene at the beginning is so violent. It gets me every time, where he's holding his mother's hand and they lop off her head and then she just drops away and the kid looks at his hand. I mean, I can't even now. I have kids. I can't watch it, but it was like it's just so powerful. And that music, I mean, it's like an opera. And it's just so much. And Sandal Bergman,
I was going to say,
she's
we gotta talk about
gorgeous,
Sandal Bergman.
and the original, totally empowered and strong. And she's no one's fool. She's a great, she doesn't use her sexuality. She's just kick ass. I mean,
you totally believe it with Sandal Bergman that she is his equal. Yes, is a powerful warrior. I mean, it was brilliant to cast her. She's a dancer, so her movements are so fluid and so precise. You can totally believe that she could best these people in sword combat.
Which is one of the things that people don't quite appreciate, I think, about Robert E. Howard, that his female characters tended. I mean, look, there were definitely like the princesses who needed to be rescued, and usually like Conan got himself in a bunch of trouble trying to rescue them. But there were also characters like Valeria. There was Bellet. There were all of like these Red Sonja of Rogatino, who embodied what Sandal Bergman brought to that role. And God bless her, she tried to do it again as the villain in the 1985 Red Sonja, of which we will make no further mention.
Well, and what Ashley's not mentioning, which we didn't mention when we introduced him, of course, is that Ashley is writing the new Red Sonja. So he's done a deep dive into Robert E. Howard and is actually living in this world right now as we speak.
Oh yeah, I could talk your ear off about just the ways in which Milius really captures what Howard was doing and what a perfect marriage that was. And also, it's very hard, I think, to bring the level of gravity that Milius brings to that film to a film like that, especially in that era. There are so many things that are working against you. The audience hasn't been trained to watch a movie like that as a serious film. You've got an actor who can't use the language to the point where there's a brilliant scene where it's the funeral, right? And he's like, he's just sort of staring at the fire, and his friend is crying, and the other guy Subutai and says, why do you cry? Because he cannot.
So
Right.
I cry for him.
So I cry for him because Schwarzenegger cannot cry. So I cry for him.
for him.
Yeah.
But the funny thing about
works. It's
Gary
brilliant.
Gary
it's
Lopez is
terrific.
he was a surfer.
Yeah.
That they just
he
plucked
used to
out of
surf
nowhere.
with Milius. He was part of the surfer
The Big Wednesday group,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And then they just cast him as.
And he's
in the-
great. He's charming.
well, he's great. Sandal Bergman's great. And then
Again,
you have.
Let's talk about Mako.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta
Mako
talk
is
about
great.
Mako as the wizard.
The tone of the movie is so good that scenes that you should be giggling at, you don't even think about giggling at because it's so serious and real and mean almost. It's reality as much as that thing can be.
It creates such a sort of a relentless, consistent tone of, it's got its fantastical fun elements, but the tone of it's dead serious, even when there's comic relief happening.
well, because
in it.
Milius is a serious man.
Yeah.
He's not somebody who's light and prone to
He's not frothy.
frothy like us. And it was also the beginning of Max von Sydow in his post Bergman career doing
yes.
the wise old man that he would do in every fantasy sci-fi movie for the next 20 years, 30 years. I mean, it was like he played King Osric, and there
And
was a
Hannah
while
and her sisters.
where people only knew. Well, I mean, and look, and that's a brilliant performance in Hannah and her sisters. I mean, Max von Sydow is so good in that. I don't sell my art by the yard, but I mean, von Sydow is just so.
He lends such a gravitas to you believe him as the king. He has that incredible voice, and that great presence.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny because he seems ancient. For 40 years, he
Right.
seemed the same age. It's like, even, post Bergman, it was like, for 40 years, he seemed like an old guy. Here he is still making movies, thank God, and just fantastic. And even though he's not in the movie for long, he's great in it.
Yeah.
You got to love Max von Sydow. And this is the year
Your
after.
still suit is fitted desert fashion.
and
Who told you to do that?
2 years before Dune and 2 years after Flash Gordon, where
Right.
he's so great as Ming the Merciless, which we didn't do in Star Wars Week and probably should have.
No, that's all right.
Okay, there you go. You
And
heard
then
it here first.
let's also give a shout out to Ron Cobb,
Absolutely.
who we spoke about in
Production
another
designer
podcast.
of the movie and does an amazing job. I mean, Ron was considered a hardware guy, and here he is doing the least hardware movie of all.
Right.
It's just an amazing trip into this strange world that is based on sort of existing cultures, but it's all sort of new.
Where did they shoot? Italy or Spain?
Spain.
Spain. Yeah. Okay. And it looks. I mean, again, pre-CGI, everything looked real.
We have great
Nothing looked
locations. They're shooting
phony.
in the snow. They're shooting in the desert. They're shooting in mountains.
Yeah, I mean, everything but the snake looks great, and then the
Right.
snake is that's pretty
in
amazing.
some shots it looks pretty
Yeah,
good.
so
The giant snake.
it's just
And you're so into it at that point that it doesn't
such a
knock
Well,
it
and then he
Gonzo
makes you
movie.
believe that Thulsa Doom can take a snake and hypnotize it and stretch it out into an arrow and fire it and hit Valeria.
I watched it so many
great.
times as a kid. I mean, I saw it in the theater, and then I watched it on video and HBO all the freaking time. I probably have half the dialogue.
But they make the
memorized.
worst pea soup in that movie.
Oh my god, the soup is amazing. That shot sticks with me. When they dump it out and you go, that's a hand and that's that looks terrible.
And I just got to say, since we mentioned Red Sonja, sadly, our good friend Ryan Condell, who is a member of our Inside the Writers' Room brigade at the Comic Cons, developed what would have been an absolutely fantastic TV version of Conan the Barbarian that he was doing with director Michael Sapochnik from Game of Thrones, and I think would have really been done, honored Robert E. Howard's work. And I guess Amazon has passed on it, which is really unfortunate because I think that show would have been pretty
I
spectacular.
agree, and I was blessed enough to have Ryan allow me to read that pilot, and it is awesome.
Yeah, he's
It's
a great writer.
Awesome.
Yeah,
It's a tragedy that show isn't going.
Yeah, I was really really sad to hear that. But so Monday, we're only on Monday.
No,
Jeez.
we're on
Tuesday.
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 I've gone through
Tuesday.
two of them.
Yes,
Tuesday.
I stand corrected. So I'd like to do Wednesday, if I might. And Steve, you mentioned that Conan was the second R-rated movie you saw.
Yes.
I'd like to nominate the first R-rated movie I assume you saw. It certainly was the first R-rated movie I saw in 1980. Excalibur.
Uh-huh.
And, we talk about Wagnerian, operatic, Orphean fantasy. And, this was Game of Thrones before there was a Game of Thrones. This was not Lord of the Rings. This was dark, edgy, screwy, as only could come from director John Boorman, the mind of John Boorman, the director of movies like Deliverance and went on to stuff like The Hidden Forest, and just a really remarkable director who I don't think gets his due. But Excalibur, again, pre-CGI era, but all anchored by one of the most brilliant performances I've seen in a movie, Nicole Williamson as Merlin. Just spectacular. He's threatening and ominous and funny and wacky and all, and it's really a great performance.
Some a dream, to others a nightmare.
and very, very early in Helen Mirren's career.
Who hated him? P.S.
Who hated...
They hated each other, Helen Mirren and Nicole Williamson.
Well, everyone hates Nicole Williamson.
Well, yeah,
I
but
mean,
like
when
she
he's on
especially
Broadway,
hated him.
apparently he's a complete ass, but doesn't mean he's not a great actor. So, but yeah, I've heard that too. And but anyway, Excalibur is just one of the great fantasy movies. And with a great cast, and it's one of the great telling of Le Morte d'Arthur, although John Boorman obviously takes great liberties with that story. It's a combination of Once a Future King, Le Morte d'Arthur.
Right.
But I think it's just a terrific movie, and certainly I'm proud that was my first R-rated movie. And
I have, I enjoy the film, but I don't like the casting of Arthur.
Nigel Terry.
Nigel Terry is kind of wrong in the young Arthur, and he's really wrong in the old Arthur.
I would not disagree with you, by the way.
I don't know what it is. Is it whether it's the physicality or he doesn't have gravitas, or he just can't do a line reading well.
He's a little stiff.
It's just he just ain't there. But all of the secondary characters are brilliant. I love all of them, including our second favorite starship captain. You know who that is?
Benjamin Sisko.
Sir Patrick Stewart is in it. I forget which knight he plays.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
There's it's the list of all of the British actors of the time in it, in various grades of shiny armor, glinting in the sunlight.
A lot of sort of beloved actors in early performances, like Gabriel Byrne, who played Uther Pendragon, a very loathsome character. It's funny.
Liam Neeson is also.
Liam Neeson was Gawain, yeah,
and transform on the form and aspect of the Duke.
Well, it's funny, and they were all fighting over a grain, and I never thought she was all that. I never could understand, and I just realized that she was either married or the daughter of John Boorman.
Yeah, he's
Katrine Boorman. I mean, I know Mordred was his son, but it's like Igraine was either was somehow related to Boorman, and
I did not know that.
There's so many stories of the production that are just
she's the daughter of John Boorman, and it's like. Yeah, I was like, really, her?
Wow. Do you know the skull cap that Merlin wore saved his life?
Is that true?
Yes, because there was I guess the production was notoriously not safe. Like you have like the knights running around in this armor that like weighed like it was full weight, and they had these swords that were full weight, and they didn't bother to train the actors like how to use them really. And Boorman sometimes wouldn't call cut, and these guys would be swinging these big goddamn like swords at each other. But apparently, I think it was a piece of the set collapsed from above and hit Nicol Williamson like right on the head. And if he had not been wearing the skull cap, it would have killed him.
Wow, that's amazing.
Isn't it? I mean, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to be on that set. It's like it must have been like living in like a live action Looney Tunes cartoon. Like,
you know who also has a small role in that? Syrian Hines, who's another fine actor who doesn't get enough love. I mean, he's terrific in Rome, and he's Munich, and just a wonderful character actor who's worked consistently. But that was one of his earliest roles as well.
That armor was just so literally dazzling in that movie.
Gosh,
it was
totally.
so shiny and so kind of over the top, but perfect in the same way.
Right.
It really captures that sort of storybook.
It's certainly the best design element in the movie and the most recognizable design element.
Well, I think it was not a particularly expensive movie, and I think they made use of what they had, like a lot of practical locations. They didn't build much at all, and there's not a lot of really elaborate.
Camelot was built,
Camelot, yeah,
and it looked terrible.
they didn't have a lot of money.
They didn't have a lot of money, and unfortunately, it shows in some spots. And I would argue that the cinematography is really uneven. And yeah, there are things I dislike about the movie that are purely technical, but I still think as a whole, it's certainly memorable and worthy of inclusion.
And nobody was making movies like this back then. I mean, this was
any time. No one ever made a movie like this.
Yeah. I mean, it's
before or
definitely
after.
yeah. I mean, it's fantasy, but done dark and real, and again, a lot of the use of the Carl Orff music is so effective. Throughout using classical music, sort of like Kubrick did in 2001. Really, I just think it's a very special film and really a great example of fantasy. Before the sort of age of fantasy we're in now, which is a very different kind of. Harry Potter, sort of light and fanciful magic as opposed to, this dark and twisted kind of world that Excalibur presented.
Well, and I think they've done adaptations of the Arthurian myth so many times in film, but I think this one is probably the one adaptation that kind of stands out.
Yeah, this was
for
not
sure.
Disney's The Sword and the Stone, yes.
No, well, because it's again a combination of sort of the reality and grittiness about it, but it's also very storybook. Mm-hmm. It's portrayed in a surreal manner, so it's completely it still looks legendary.
Well, like when Lancelot goes and meets, Guinevere in sort of secret,
Right.
and it's all, real. And this is before you had color grading and everything, but it's all
Right.
lush and green, and
Right.
and then of course
Then they wake up and
yeah.
whoopsie.
And the Grail is gone. They send Indiana Jones to go find it.
Right.
Wrong movie. And then everything gets really dark. And
Right.
I mean, it's just even like when he rides out across the dragon's breath to go to a grain. It's just very moody and atmospheric. And
It's only a model.
It knows exactly what it is as a film, and it Borman never succumbs to any temptation to wink at the audience or to make it feel contemporary or to do any number of things that I think could easily knock you out of this film. And also, much like Conan the Barbarian, Milius's Conan the Barbarian, Excalibur is a movie that's about something, and I think you have characters who are actually struggling with what does loyalty mean? What does it mean to be good? What is magic? There are all of these things that I think inform the film that elevate it. So that it doesn't just feel like you're going through an exercise and, wow, isn't it cool that he's got freaking Excalibur? It feels like Excalibur is as much a burden as it is like it's not his lightsaber, I'll put it that way.
These are all movies with a strong directorial point of view, and I would also add that in the case of Conan, and Excalibur, these are movies that are written by the director. Now, John Borman wrote it with Roscoe Pallenberg, but he was a writer and a director. And in the case of Conan, it was a writer, director, and John Milius. So you really sense that vision, a cohesive vision in both movies, which I think
And
makes
also
them...
the same thing with Dragon Slayer as well.
Yeah, right, with Barward and Robbins, which really makes them flawed masterpieces. I would not hold up any of these as unmitigated successes, but they are flawed masterpieces.
Yeah.
So
Let's also I want to do a quick shout out to the one sheet for Excalibur, which is
I had that on my wall too.
Bob Peake.
Bob
right?
Peake, yep.
Yeah, that's
wonderful
gorgeous
artwork on that poster.
Because in a previous episode, I said I had Conan and Psycho 2 and Revenge of the Jedi. I also had Excalibur because that was a freaking gorgeous poster. I had that in my office for a long time too. I had that framed. It's a beautiful, beautiful poster. Where is it now? I'd like to put that back up in my office.
I don't have it.
So you don't have it. Okay. So Ashley, we're on Thursday now. Do you have a film in mind?
What say you?
to show on Thursday on the 4:30 movie?
1985's Red Sonja. I'm kidding. Yeah, never.
Well,
never.
Bridget
We're gonna
Nielsen.
expunge that from.
Well, that also
from-
had a great score. Ennio Morricone with
yes, it did.
saying Sonia, Sonia. His chorus of literally saying the name of the movie throughout.
Good
Sisters are dying. I'm Lord Kalimdor.
Conan the Destroyer.
Conan the Destroyer. No, it's becoming sort of a pattern with me that I channel my inner 11-year-old or 12-year-old.
Cloak and Dagger is not eligible.
Cloak and Dagger. Damn it! No,
A dagger is a kind of sword. It's a little sword.
It's a tiny little sword, and there is kind of a cloak, and you wear that if you're a thief. And you're. I am selecting Krull.
okay.
Oh, interesting
All right.
choice. Yeah.
Krull is not a film that you
It's
go.
not
oh,
a
wow,
film.
Well,
Stop
it's not
right
a film.
there.
It's a
It's
TV
not a
show.
film.
It's a commercial. It's a dessert topping and a floor wax. No, Krull is not, I would say, a great film, but Jesus. There's so much cool shit in it. And when I was a kid, the thing that got me, so many things got me. I mean, this is sort of a sword and sorcery movie about an alien invasion. How unbelievably fucking cool is that, right? You've got the Black Fortress, which lands, I guess, from outer space, on this fantasy world, and the Beast, and his dudes, and it's just, there's just something about it that is just. It takes the next level and it says, screw it. What's the next level after that in terms of how bananas this can get? And on top of that, it throws in Lysette Anthony, who is unbelievably beautiful. I had such a crush on her. And for my money, the coolest, greatest weapon in the history of sword and sorcery films, the glaive. So badass.
It was about the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
Had the coolest name.
Absolutely. Everything about it was awesome.
Yeah.
Right? It's I could have just watched somebody just throw the glaive again.
It's
and
like
again.
in the age of the ninja stars were kind of a big thing at that point,
Right.
And that was like the ultimate ninja star,
Right? You could kill all the ninjas with the glaive.
Remember your failure at the glaive.
And by the way,
We have
it's
Yoda here to comment.
Ken Marshall is the lead, and he had hair then, and
a lot of hair.
Yeah, and yes, like Peter McNichol, it was super curly. Wait, no, was it? Yes, it was. Ken Marshall, if you're a super geek like us, you'll know him as Commander Eddington from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which had my second favorite captain, Benjamin Sisko, where he was quite excellent, appeared in several episodes as sort of a Maquis foil for Captain Sisko. But so I have a soft
Deep cuts.
spot. Thank you. I have a soft spot.
And of course,
for
this
Ken.
had Liam Neeson in it as well, playing Keegan.
That's
so,
right.
Every fantasy movie in the 80s had to have Liam Neeson in it.
Right?
Why was he
He's,
not
I
Conan?
think, been 50 years
Well,
old
because
for
he
the
has
last
a very
50 years.
specific set of skills.
Yes. To make me a nightmare for beasts like you from the outer
And I
darkness.
have to say, there are two things
I will glaive you.
I'm not a fan of this movie.
Me either.
Remotely. In fact, it was the summer that it came out, and I was going to Brown for some summer camp thing at Brown University, and we went on a road trip, and we got to see there were two movies we had a choice between. This is the anti-Sophie's choice, by the way. It was Crawl and Jaws 3D, and I had to figure out which movie I wanted
boy.
to see less. So I ended up going to see. I went to see Crawl, and the two things that I take from that experience. The James Horner score is magnificent.
Yep, absolutely.
Too many notes.
Too many. It's
Thank you,
magnificent.
Salieri.
And I heard it in Battle Beyond the Stars, but
Sure.
I was glad to have it back. And and then, of course, the beautiful and wonderful actress Lysette Anthony,
Yes.
who I thought, after this travesty would never work again. And she's in one of my absolute favorite movies and brilliant in it, Woody Allen's Husbands and Wives, where she plays the dopey yoga girlfriend of Sidney Pollack's character, who's on the rebound from his divorce from Judy Davis, and she is so
Oh,
good
she's
in that
so
movie.
good, yeah.
She is so good. I'm like, I had to do a double take. This is before IMDb. Wait, is that from Crawl? That can't be. That cannot be Lissa from Crawl. And it was. And oh my God, is she good in that in Husbands and Wives, which is really one of Woody Allen's masterpieces. So I'm like, oh, maybe this Crawl isn't so bad after all.
Krull to me always was like, what kind of sci-fi movie would Terry Gilliam make if he was absolutely terrible at making movies.
Well put.
Oh my
Although,
God.
look, I think what Crawl really is, there's like this whole class of movies that deep in our hearts, we want them to be great. Because there are these things that are just conceptually about them that are just like,
We love all the
we're
ingredients.
rooting for you.
We
We're
love the
cheering for you.
ingredients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is, in my opinion, it is so worth a watch if you haven't seen it before.
Yes.
Just to kind of, again, you're not going to walk out going like, wow, I really feel as though I've learned something about the riddle of steel. That's not going to happen. But you are going to walk away thinking, wow, the glaive is cool. And wow, that was a cool idea. And
Commander
wow, is it
Eddington's in
Anthony?
it.
Yeah, and Commander Eddington's in it. It's there are so many things to recommend it like as a watch. Certainly, I wouldn't recommend it as anybody's favorite film. It's No Battle Beyond the Stars.
Well, it's so interesting too is that Peter Yates directed it.
Yes,
and
the director of Bullet. My God.
right. Bullet,
Which
and
explains the great car chase.
right.
In the middle of Crawl.
he also did the great, bicycling movie,
Breaking Away.
in '79.
Yes, Breaking Away is amazing.
Yeah.
It's a great film.
And
You
then
can
later,
only imagine what sort of
Was Jack Sparrow really in
medications
that?
he was on at the
I don't
time
think so,
that took away his reasoning
Right.
to do this and took away his skills for this moment
I
in time.
understand that the production was very difficult. Like that, there were just they would build things that just wouldn't work, and it was just the effects were a big problem. And just I think it just got away from everybody.
It is the dictionary definition of a train wreck.
Yeah.
In terms of movies, I watched it again for the first time in a long, long time a few weeks ago, and I was just going, "Oh my God, what the hell are they doing?" It's just each new scene, you're just going, "Oh my God, why are you doing this?" And it's just they just pile on the stuff.
and it's slow.
constantly.
It's lethargically paced, and it's just.
But it's
I
not
would say that this film is probably one of the only films that we've programmed on the 430 Movie podcast that would actually be on the 430 Movie.
Yeah.
Plus, it's like you don't have to rush home from school that day. You're like, oh, Crawl's on. I'll hang out.
I'll walk today.
I think I'm
I'll
gonna
walk
play
home
outside.
and take the bus.
yeah.
So it's good.
Oh, good! I got home just in time for the part with the glaive. And I said, Anthony, wait, is she not wearing? Oh, yay!
Okay, so
I have
Thursday
strange
Crawl,
stirrings in my utility belt.
which brings us.
So we might want to mention that we don't really do a lot of planning in advance of the show. I'm sure you can't tell.
I don't think we need to mention it. That is abundantly clear.
But we did decide to disqualify Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films and
Which
the
is
Hobbit
legitimate
films from
because
this.
it's not really sword and sorcery.
Yeah.
Sword and sorcery is a type of pulp genre. And I think that Lord of the Rings is more elevated fantasy. I think it would be for Fantasy Week if we did. But I don't think it's
people
sword
at
and
home
sorcery.
listening, why the fuck did they not mention Lord of the Rings? Those are amazing.
To be honest, the extended version of Fellowship of the Ring would fit through 5 days. So, that's
In fact, you could do like one ending per day of Return of the King.
Yeah.
And
It's Lord of the Rings month on the 430 movie.
Well, about once a year, I revisit those extended editions, and I usually watch one disc per night. So I watch, half of Fellowship, and then the second half of Fellowship, and then half of the Two Towers. You really do fill out a whole week.
All of
watching
this
miniseries.
chainmail took 6 months to make by
Richard Taylor has joined us.
5 people. It's really wonderful. The workers at Weta making this by hand every day, 12 hours a day, no water.
You never know who's going to show up on the 430 movie.
So I just wanted to get that out there. So for Friday, we have some other options. I would throw out maybe Clash of the Titans.
Interesting. That
featuring
There's a sword.
Bobo the Owl and Harry Hamlin.
Bubo.
I mean, I think
Bubo.
another option might be Legend with Tom Cruise and
yeah.
Mia Sara.
Isn't that doesn't that fall under our definition of high fantasy?
No.
No.
Oh, I guess because it's like an asshole with a sword and a princess.
Fantasy,
No.
There's not a whole lot of swords.
Okay, Lady Hawk. Lady
Hawk.
Lady Hawk.
Lady Hawk would also be.
Lady
I think,
Hawk
would
with
definitely
Avery
be
Brooks
fantasy.
as Hawk.
But what? Of course,
Lady and the Hawk.
Beastmaster.
Beastmaster.
Oh,
Right?
Beastmaster,
Remember when
yeah.
HBO stood for Hey, Beastmaster's on?
Hey, Beastmaster's on.
Oh my goodness!
Constantly.
And of
it's a
course-
man and two ferrets fighting evil. I mean,
I'm not a fan of Willow, but I know George Lucas is.
Yeah, this was a film I wanted to do sort of a take on Tolkien and do a little fantasy, get some little people taking on evil.
George, would you consider this a sword and sorcery movie, or is it strictly a fantasy movie?
No, I think it's more fantasy. It's it's literary type fantasy.
Wow.
Epic mythological storytelling.
And
I got my friend Ron directed it. Excellent job. We're good.
well, thank you, George. Thanks for
Reckon it's so
dropping
well.
by. I know you were checking out the museum down in by USC.
There's Dragonheart, of course, with
Sean Connery.
Sean Connery as the dragon.
Oh, yeah.
Shakari.
And the good thing is we have Sean Connery here to talk about Dragonheart.
I'd rather not talk about Dragonheart ever again.
Okay.
But
well,
do we, would something like Monty Python and the Holy Grail qualify?
That's
in
actually
sort
what
of
I was thinking about.
Or
Monty
the Princess
Python and the Holy
Bride.
Grail. Well,
Yeah,
that's
Princess
true. Princess Bride.
Fantasy.
more fantasy? Love story.
Yeah,
I
there's
don't
no
know.
sorcery in it.
What?
a
Well,
little bit.
and
Yeah,
like
what's
little
Carol
bit.
Kane and Billy
Princess-
Crystal? Aren't they like kind
There's-
of?
Yeah,
these
kind
were
of.
like
Make
the
the
making
magic-
potions
magic
fuzzy.
Max.
It's like
Yeah.
I would say that Lady Hawk and Princess Bride kind of exist in their own little genre of like sort of they're really romances.
Yeah.
Even you know what I mean? They're just not the same. Like
So we're going to save
yeah.
it for Rob Reiner week on the 4th.
yeah, exactly. I think to me, sword and sorcery is like there is some a-hole with like a special weapon, and there's a sorcerer, and that's the bad guy, and that is kind of the heart of what the conflict is, which is why I selected Cloak and Dagger for this week.
So look, I think you make a very good point. So if we're going to say that Princess Bride is not strictly sword and sorcery, which it's really not, Monty Python and
I
the
think
Holy
we
Grail.
have to. I mean,
is
they have a
really
sorcerer
good
named
suggestion.
Tim.
They do.
Yeah.
Some call him Tim.
Some.
They're seeking a magical item.
Yeah.
There's a collection of knights with swords.
If Excalibur
It's a fairly
is
silly place.
is in the list,
Right.
then Monty Python and the Holy Grail has to be seriously considered.
Well, not seriously considered.
Well, is
There's
Excalibur
nothing
my
serious about Holy Grail, but it has to be considered.
Actually, I think it, on a production design stance, I think it looks a heck of a lot more like Arthurian legend would have looked than than Excalibur does.
some lovely
Oh,
filth
man,
down
that's
here.
heresy.
I honestly, if we're going to kind of talk about it from that point of view, I don't think either of them look anything like what it would have looked like, because it's all very medieval,
Right.
and that is not actually like
No.
kind of the where the source comes from. I mean, but obviously, look, the Arthur mythos have been interpreted, reinterpreted, combined, dropped into like the food processor and sent to frappe over and over again.
But to be fair, the Arthurian legends began to be told in the medieval age.
A little bit. Just the history of all this stuff is like incredibly fascinating. I mean, shit, like not all of it was even originated in England. Like
Right.
Chrétien, who was the French poet, Lancelot in The Knight of the Cart. Lancelot, as he was originally conceived, is an idiot.
Right.
Like a complete idiot. He's not the best knight. He's kind of a dumbass.
Well, if you sleep with the king's wife, you're a dumbass.
Yeah, you're definitely a dumbass, right? You'd better be a badass dumbass if you're gonna, not.
I'd like
not
to
gonna-
nominate the Next Generation episode Cupid. I think that we're pretty much at a point where it's either Monty Python, the Holy Grail, or we haven't talked about, but you mentioned it, the Beastmaster, which of course had the virtue of having Man Who Talks to the Animals, Mark Singer, also the Aliens,
Tanya Roberts,
the great Tanya Roberts,
right? And one of the a seminal moment on
PG
film.
nudity,
Yeah.
and of course a villain played by Rip Torn. And then it also had the great character actor John Amos, which is always a sign of a
I think
Great
quality.
movie.
Beastmaster
Good
is
times.
a-
It's good times ahead.
It's a worthy competitor.
I have no qualms about having Beastmaster in the list.
My question though
but
about
also, we should consider a Clash of the Titans too.
That's true.
Which
Ray Harryhausen is not represented yet.
That's true,
Yeah,
actually.
so
That is
Jason
a
the
fair
Argonauts.
point. In fact, to me, that might be the winning argument because I don't know that you can really have a complete conversation about sword and sorcery
I have
unless
to
you're
agree.
talking
I
about
think that's a
Harryhausen.
very powerful argument. How can we, particularly to an audience where a lot of the people listening may not even know who Ray Harryhausen is, never seen a Harryhausen picture. And it was such a staple of those 4:30 movies as well, and certainly
right.
the television of the era. So to
Was
just
between
ignore
Sinbad
Ray
and
Harryhausen,
Jason the
Argonauts.
yeah, and arguably Clash of the Titans is probably the worst of all those movies. Maybe Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger. Maybe it's better than that.
But it's the most accessible.
But it's the most accessible. It definitely shows the influence of Star Wars with the robotic owl. It also has the vestiges of that 70s all-star cast. You get Laurence Olivier and Ursula Andress and
Maggie Smith,
and then Harry Hamlin as Perseus.
Right.
And the Medusa was really cool.
Yeah, it was
stop mo.
actually.
I'm kind
I
of
like those giant scorpions too. I always
Yeah.
thought those are awesome. And
Yeah.
Pegasus got a flying horse, and of course, it's got.
Of course.
We're talking about the
of course.
1981 Clash of the Titans, not the more recent.
Not the
version,
film
but-
noir. I think you were talking about the film noir. Clash
And of course, it
Titans.
has the legendary line, "Release the Kraken."
Yes,
That's
right. And by the way, isn't it great? I think
We need a
I don't know if I would
t-shirt
say
that says
great,
that.
but I think it's important that monsters like the Kraken have names like Kraken and not names like Steve. Because just imagine how different Clash of the Titans would be if the line were "Release Steve." It just doesn't have the same mythic power.
My biggest problem is it did not have Liam Neeson in it, whereas the remake
Release
did.
Liam Neeson.
But I think that it really does feel like
I think we got to go with Clash.
we got to go with Clash of the Titans to end our week. What do you think?
So say we all.
Yes.
So Monday,
Monday is
Dragon
Dragon
Slayer.
Slayer.
Tuesday,
Conan the Barbarian.
Wednesday is Excalibur, Thursday,
Krull.
and on Friday, closing
Wrap it
out
up.
Sword and Sorcery Week is
Clash of the Titans.
Clash of the Titans. So this has been Sword and Sorcery Week on the 4:30
Which
movie.
I saw at the Dale City Cinemas in Northern Virginia.
Was Ashley
where
there at the
Ashley-
same
I
time?
was not there, but I did see it.
He's with you in
the
spirit.
theater.
And I want to remind you that my new book, So Say We All, is on sale at bookstores now. Also, I will be at the New York Comic-Con October 5th and 6th, hosting panels on Galactica, A to Dr. Z, and hosting a Ron Moore masterclass with Chris Parnell of Sony Pictures Television. Get your tickets while they're still available. We also have an exciting new website, 430movie.com, no colon, featuring the amazing 430 Movie swag designed by our very own Daren Dochterman, which is available for sale. So support the podcast and support you looking cool and suave in our awesome 430 apparel.
And let's not forget to thank our
I was
engineer.
just about to do that. I want to thank Bill Ritter here at Electric Studios, who has done a fantastic job making us sound good. We'll never look good, but we sound good. And it's all because of Bill and our friends here at Electric Entertainment who have kindly provided the studio for us to use for this ridiculous podcast. And I also want to tell you how you can continue the conversation on social media with Steve Melching
At Stephen Melching.
Daren Dochterman.
At Daren Doc, 1R.
Ashley Miller at Ashmaster0.
And I'm Mark A. Altman. I can be reached on Twitter and Instagram at Mark A. Altman. And available at a local bookstore is my new book, So Say We All, along with my classic oral histories of Star Trek, The 50-Year Mission, and Buffy, Slayers and Vampires, all on sale now. So thank you for joining us for the 4:30 movie. We'll be back with an all-new theme week next week, and we look forward to seeing you at the movies.
Time to sheath those swords.
The hell with you.